Jamie, are we ready? Is it recording?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Economic Development Subcommittee meeting for February 22nd, 2023 to order, time being 6 o'clock, 6:01. A note to residents. All citizens are welcome to attend public board and committee meetings in person. Additionally, in an effort to maximize citizen engagement opportunities, citizens will be able to continue to participate remotely via phone or Zoom. The meetings will also be live streamed by Franklin TV and shown on Comcast Channel 11 and Verizon Channel 29. If you would like to get into the meeting, you can click on the link on the agenda on the website, or you can call in is 1-929-205-6099. And the meeting ID number is 833-0873-1233, then press the pound symbol. I'll say that number again, 833-0873-1233, then press pound. Okay, so tonight we are going to have a discussion, an overview about Chapter 40B for people. I feel like we sort of need a refresher, but also people have been talking a lot about it, and people really don't understand what the differences are and what has been happening in town. So I thought it would be a good idea for us to have this discussion. And so our first item on the agenda tonight is a discussion or overview of Chapter 40B. And I'm going to throw it over to Jamie first.
Sure.
Okay. Jamie
Good
first.
evening, everyone. Just as a quick little bit to add on to what Councilor Hamlin said. So later in the evening, we're getting an introduction to a project on Grove Street proposal, which is called on the agenda Friendly 40B. And it kind of, I think through you, Madam Chair, I think we all hear about 40B. Everyone knows the two letters in one letter, or the two numbers in one letter, and it brings up so many emotions. And we actually have met our 10% requirement to avoid what people always think of as the toxic 40Bs, which override zoning, but there really are a lot of other housing options. And Brian and Amy have put together a great presentation of an overview. And I've been here over now 7 years, going in my 8th year here, and never has there been a discussion, at least my tenure, of what is Chapter 40B. It's always in the context of reaction to something near their house. And that's okay. But I think it's a very complicated law, and as Brian will articulate in a minute, it's a very old law. And it was passed back in the late 60s. And so we thought that it might be helpful, and we appreciate your support here at the EDC, to just do a half hour, whatever it takes, overview of what Chapter 40B is, what are some of the projects in town right now that are under 40B, and hopefully give everybody some visuals and some context as to what the law really is and what it's done in its history. So I guess with that, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'll just pass it over to Brian and Amy to go through the slides.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian and Amy.
Thank you. For the record, Brian Taberna, Director of Planning and Community Development. With me, Amy Love, the Town Planner. I'm going to give a presentation, so about 20 slides, and it is not extremely detailed by any means. It just lays out the basics of 40B. Because if we wanted to do a 60-slide presentation, you'd get all the details. But and not being an expert, if you will, in a 40B, I think the ZBA actually is much more up on all of the issues, because that's where applications go. So what the presentation outline is basically what is a 40B. We'll talk about the comprehensive permit for a minute. I want to talk about the HPP, the Housing Production Plan, for just a second. The Franklin Subsidized Housing Inventory for a minute. What actually is affordable home, and who qualifies for affordable homes? And then we'll talk really quickly about the current 40Bs in town, and the fairly recent friendly 40B project review process that the town established, that the administration established. So what is a 40B? Mass General Law, Chapter 40B, also known as the Comprehensive Permit Law, enacted in 1969 to help expand the number of communities and neighborhoods where households with low and moderate income could secure a safe, affordable home. It's an affordable housing production tool. All 40B projects must have at least 20 to 25%, depending on the type, of housing units as affordable. And permitting of so-called 40B project is through the Zoning Board of Appeals, not the Planning Board. That is a kind of a key thing that people have to understand. The ZBA comprehensive permit process is what the process the ZBA goes through when an application comes in for a 40B. It allows for a streamlined permit process, and the ZBA may apply more flexible standards than the local zoning requirements. That's one way of saying that they can get rid of a lot of the requirements for subdivisions and a variety of other things. It make it a lot easier for a project to actually happen, going through the ZBA process instead of the planning board.
Can I ask you a question while you're giving the
Yeah,
talk
sure.
at the same time? So we mean maybe more flexible. Is there are there guidelines for the ZBA to follow?
Yes, there are. There's guidelines, and a lot of times when you see an application come in, we're talking a little bit now about friendly 40Bs, which I'll get to, but when the 40B applications come in, they've already decided that what they're going to look to get waived certain zoning regulations. There's usually a pretty long list of them that come in at that time. ZBA is the authority on whether to waive them or not. So, like I said, if it was going to the planning board, we have these zoning bylaws and these subdivision regulations, which we go by specifically, and some can be waived a little. But in the ZBA comprehensive permit, they can waive a lot more than the planning board would be able to do. Okay, so is exactly what you'd have to. That's in the fine print that we would have to get into at a later date if you want to.
Are there different levels, like depending on like if some towns want to be more flexible than other towns, or is it just like basically like the state flexible? Oh,
I think I was going to say, I bet Mark would be able to tell you that.
Mark.
So first of all, it's not just zoning, it's all local bylaws.
Sure.
They're all on the table, they can all be overridden. The general standard has to do with the need for housing in the community, affordable housing in the community or the area, the general area. That's the primary consideration unless and until you get over 10%. There's actually a presumption that's virtually impossible to overcome if you've got anything contrary. The developer has a claim for the need is that the individual waivers are necessary because if they're imposed, individual requirements, either individually or in combination, make the project uneconomical. And that's the standard. So all this comes to the fore much more so, as Brian kind of alluded to, when you're under 10%, the standard somewhat changes once you're over 10%, and you have increased flexibility. And again, the 10% is in the state regulations. That's a safe harbor. Once you get to the 10%, you cannot be compelled to approve a 40B, an affordable project, or to grant these waivers. Then it becomes more of a weighing. Is it in the community's interest for a particular project that's proposed, whether it's friendly or not friendly? This pending before the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Sorry, Brian.
No, that's quite all right. Get some things clarified. So Chapter 40B requires, as Mark just said, requires each city or town have at least 10% of its total year-round housing units as affordable housing. And that's what's known as the 10% statutory minimum set forth in 730 CMR. The 40B is considered somewhat controversial, and many communities feel the 40B projects are forced on them, and there is very little control, local control. Override of a community's zoning regulations is of special concern for most towns. However, in 2010, and I'm not sure if it happened again in 2016, but I'm not sure. There was the voters of Massachusetts supported keeping Chapter 40B as a tool for providing affordable homes for people of all ages. So 58% of voters said yes. So they had the opportunity to get rid of the law. They did not, and we are with it right now. So the comprehensive permit issued by ZBA can be issued for a wide range of housing types. Single-family homes or a subdivision is a standard, and also multifamily housing developments, either by a condo development where you have home ownership, or apartment developments. Also, senior housing, like the town has up on the Franklin Ridge is coming, and the other one that's already there are good examples of that. So I want to just talk quickly about the HPP, or the Housing Production Plan. That's the proactive strategy for planning and developing affordable housing. The most important purpose is to develop goals and strategies that will result in the community reaching the 10% statutory minimum. Mass Department of Housing Community keeps track of the number and the status of each community's affordable housing on its subsidized housing inventory. I just want to note that in 2017, the town, Franklin, surpassed this state mandated target of 10%. Again, on the HPP, three major sections in the HPP: the Comprehensive Housing Needs Assessment, which is the bulk of the document; the Affordable Housing Goals, which are basic goals intended to increase the number of SHI eligible housing units, and the increase the number of housing units for communities, families, people with special needs, elderly. And then the implementation strategies are some of the work that the EDC's been doing lately, and that which, the zoning amendments that we're working on. Also, it requires strategies to explore incentives, which is something we should talk about in the near future, I think. The subsidized housing inventory, we'll try to run through this very quickly. Again, we need 10% year-round units. Subsidized housing is the list of affordable housing units that the state uses to calculate that our percentage of low and moderate income housing.
So I just,
Can you hold on a
just to
second, Brian?
clarify going forward, because this is the biggest source of confusion. When we're talking affordable, it's a term of art. It's based on there being a permanent affordable restriction on the properties. It's
Right.
not affordable based on market values in the area.
Very true.
So, and that's something that people get confused about all the time. We're talking a legal requirement of affordability as defined by the state.
That's like the capital A versus the small a?
Right.
Okay, Jamie, you wanted to add something?
Mark couldn't have summarized it best by the term art. Affordable oftentimes is in the eye of the beholder. What I think is affordable is different than you or whatever, and what we want to pay is different. So when we talk about that word, it's used, and I agree with Mark, couldn't be emphasized enough at where the most confusion comes from. It's a defined set, and Brian will get to it in a second, of exactly what is affordable defined, and the only guaranteed technique to have an affordable unit, according to the standards that Brian outlined in a second, is really a deeded unit, not based on people's hyperbole of what's affordable in the market situation. So I couldn't second what Mark said even more than that, and I know Brian's going to go through the limits, the income limits, shortly.
Yeah, very
you
briefly,
have a
we'll
question?
get to that.
Okay, Patrick has a question.
So I guess basically means that at this point, frankly, people would think things are affordable that aren't affordable legally, right? Is that the point?
Well, to be legally affordable is one thing.
What does it mean?
To be affordable for each individual person is
Right.
all different, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It really depends on the word and what you're using.
Okay,
To be on the subsidized housing inventory, it needs to be affordable according to certain guidelines at the time that they were added to that. And there's a variety of different types of so-called affordable on there. There are your so-called 40Bs that we're talking about tonight. There are senior housing projects which, you know, that, or over 55s where they say, okay, we're gonna give you 10% affordable units or something like that. So there's a lot of different things. They're not all 40B types. They could also be the housing authority units. Those are all on our, and they didn't go through a 40B process either. And there are a couple other things on it. Also, if in one of our developments, Mass Development paid the owner of them a certain dollar amount so they could bring the cost down of all the units, and now that whole apartment complex is on our affordable housing inventory. There's a lot of different ways to get to affordable. But, so the reason that we are over 10% is one thing I just mentioned, but the Housing Trust is always working at they've worked on, they're working on a second large senior project, but they also have done some smaller things in the past that have gone on to the SHI. The ZBA approved the comprehensive permit application for Weston Woods back in September 2015. That resulted in 280 apartments being added to the SHI. 25% were affordable units, and that 25% that's up there is actually another 20%. That actually increased our SHI inventory by 25% by increasing to 280. 2 years later, we had Mass Development provided finances to Glen Meadow Apartments in back of us here. That resulted in 288 units being added. So with those two, we actually ended up in very good shape. Earlier on, we actually had, I can't remember the exact number, we were at 8.88% affordable back about 5, 6, 7 years ago. But with these two big developments going on, we actually are in very good shape now. So according to the web, this is a kind of, don't lose me on this one, and just, we're gonna have to, as of December 21st, 2020, 11.9% of the town of Franklin's year-round units are on the 40B subsidized housing inventory.
Okay.
Therefore, Franklin's in compliance with 40B, is not under immediate pressure to increase the number of affordable units. The total year-round housing inventory is based on the 2010 census, even though the 2020 census happened a few years ago, a couple of years ago, whenever it was. So the actual number of year-round housing units is actually much more. In fact, it's probably 1,200 or more housing units more than what the. So therefore, we're not actually at 11.96% right now, but substantially less. And there's a note on the bottom there that says the reason the state is still using the 2010 census, and is that the U.S. Census is not giving them numbers that they can turn into year-round housing units, which is the number that they use in the inventory. So, next slide, please. So I'm using some numbers that we have in town, and then hopefully it will make some sense to you. So again, up there is November 2019 where we were. They were using the 1130, which was the 2010 census. And we had at the time 11.95. We added in with building permits over a 10, 11-year period, 1,295 units. That's how much more building we had in that decade. Okay? And that's actually over 11% increase in housing units in town for that decade. So estimated number of housing units, because we don't have the 2020 exact numbers, is roughly 12,645. And if you look at that and compare it to the amount of units that we have, that we know we have, at 1,356, or 50s, we still have 10.7% roughly
Okay.
of housing units. If the state comes back and says that my numbers are wrong and they're, you know, a few off here and there, fine, but it's generally where we are right now.
Okay.
Now, if we had the same level of development over this next 10-year period between 2020 and 2030, it has slowed down substantially, but it could pick up again. And same amount, 1,295 more, would give you the town 13,940 approximately. And at that point, without adding more affordable units to the SHI, we would drop down under 10%.
Okay.
So it is important to think about increasing the SHI inventory, even though we're in pretty good shape right now, because you don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Okay. Now, there's 3 projects that have already been permitted but have not been built. Franklin Ridge, which we're working with the developer on up there to develop another affordable apartments and assisted living, 60 units total. All of them would be on the SHI. Madeline Village and Chestnut Senior Village are, well, Madeline is a condo type of housing unit, which 25% would go on, 32, 8 or would be SHI. And Senior Village is a 1 building with 27 units. 4 of them would be affordable if that gets constructed.
So, can I just ask you a question about, so they're not built, but they're permitted. Are they on our list?
No, they're not
They're
on
not
the
on our list
inventory as
now,
of
right?
right now.
Because
No.
I read something about if it takes too long to build, then they have to come off.
Yeah, some of them go right on and then they don't build them and they come back off.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if any of these went on and came off, but they're not on the inventory as of right now.
Okay, and the Madeline Village, was that permitted before we had 10%?
Went through ZBA.
Right.
Correct.
Oh, Mark?
So, Brian sort of alluded to it, we were up and down for a while, we
Yeah.
were over 10%, and then Glen Meadows dropped off, and we dropped under 10%, and during that window, if you will, Madeline Village applied, because we were under 10%, they went forward. But then the state came in and helped to facilitate Glen Meadow becoming affordable, so we picked up units again and went back up over 10%. But there was a gap in there.
Right.
Couple of quick points. Number one, the state treats home ownership and rental differently. You only get credit in a home ownership project for the actual affordable units. However, on rental, you get credit if you have 25% of a project is affordable, you get credit for all the rental units.
Right. Yeah, okay, and so, in the permit, so they get a permit, I think there's some people out there are like, well, when they have a permit, they don't build, then the permit goes away, but
that's
it
the
doesn't
other-
go away, they can just,
That was the other part, I'm sorry.
okay, so,
So when the ZBA hands down a decision, they go on the subsidized housing inventory. The developer has a year to pull its building permits. For whatever reason, if they do not pull the building permits within the year,
right,
then they drop off. If they pull the building permits, then there is another period of time, which I don't know offhand, I don't know if Gus knows, but they have a certain period of time that they have to build out, or again, they drop down. So.
Gus just said 6 months.
And just as an example, I said earlier that all the local bylaws and ordinances are determined by the ZBA, and Chapter 40B essentially trumps those, allows them to be waived. State statutes and regulations still apply, and the Conservation Commission principally enforces the state regulations. So as an example, you could have a project approved by the ZBA, but is subject to conservation action under the Wetland Protection Act, and that itself could drag on for a significant period so that you end up losing those units temporarily, at least, off your inventory.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Glenn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For my fellow counselors who may be new to some of the items listed here under the SHI housing development. Franklin Ridge, we're pretty familiar with now. That's that new senior living housing they want to build up next to the existing senior housing. And Chestnut Senior Village is also a good project. And when Glen Meadows came on as another affordable that helped us push us over 11%, that was also some wise work in getting us to that affordable housing units. But I will admit that Madeline Village, which kind of snuck in under the radar, is one of those kind of projects that would not, in my opinion, benefit the community as a whole, because it ultimately changes a whole neighborhood. Even though we would benefit 8 units from the project, it wouldn't really be a big benefit to the community as a whole because of its location. And really, it was one of those that back a few years ago when our number dropped below 10%, they went to the state and they said, okay, go for it. They went through the whole ZBA process. The ZBA approved it. They gave them a list of requirements for them to come back with that, I kid you not, are this big, which is why that's been sitting on the books for so long. They have issues with sewer tie-ins, they have issues with moving streams, and so on and so forth. So it's right next to one of our top properties. So that is one of those projects that, even though it would afford us some affordable housing units, doesn't necessarily benefit the community as a whole. That's my opinion.
And that's why it's really important to stay above 10%.
Bingo. Well, that's a classic example of what can happen when we drop it to 10%.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right.
Well, Mark, did you have something to add?
Yes,
Okay.
briefly. So, the affordability is generally in perpetuity as long as the underlying zoning does not permit, or the underlying land use, including zoning, doesn't permit the project. Glen Meadows is an exception, and you kind of have to be aware of this. When it was built back in either the late 60s, early 70s, that was an as-of-right project. They didn't have to get any zoning relief. So the original affordability restriction only ran with their federal financing program. And when that expired, it dropped off, and that's what happened in the first place. The state came in, they've essentially refinanced and re-upped for another period. But I don't believe that is affordable in perpetuity either. I believe it's been extended, but at some point in the future, it's going to expire again.
Okay, all right. I knew there was some different things there. Okay, yeah. All right, excellent. Thank you for that clarification, Brian.
All right, back to me. My understanding was that Glen Meadows is a permanent in perpetuity, but we'll have to check on that because that's an important issue. Another thing that slipped in, if you will, as Glenn was saying, is Western Woods. That's one that we dropped down, and 200 and some odd units came on, which is good in some respects, but that was a forced 40B essentially. It was
Okay.
something that CBA was dealing with
Right.
under that process. So what is affordable housing? There's two things. First of all, what is an affordable home, and who can live in an affordable home? There are two different issues. Okay. Department of Housing and Urban Development (HUD) determines housing is affordable in a household. A family or individual will spend between 30 and 33% of its annual income, gross income, on housing costs. Housing costs are defined as mortgage, or rent, for that matter, taxes, and insurance. And then we need to assess the median gross family income to see that they fit into certain categories. So every once in a while, each year, I believe, the HUD comes up with this. The Boston area median income is $140,200. Households with income under 80% of that median income qualify for affordable. Now, if you do the math, I've been looking at these things for many years. If you do the math, I don't see where 80% is any of those numbers there on the chart exactly. But in general, this is what we go by. If you're an individual and you want to rent or purchase an affordable unit, the income level is $78,300. You have to make less than that to actually be accepted into the program. And it goes up. Family of four is over $1,100,000. So a person qualifies for an affordable housing unit if They meet the current income guidelines, which we just talked about. They are a first-time home buyer if they're purchasing. They have to be a first-time home buyer, which they define, though, as a home in the last 3 years. So if 10 years ago you sold a house, you still can go into the program at this point. They have to obtain a mortgage if they're purchasing, assuming, and they have to have a 3% down payment, and they meet the asset limit of $75,000. If you have money in the bank, if you're worth more than $75,000, you don't afford, you cannot qualify for affordable homes.
No kidding.
Yeah. So in other words, you really do have to be broke. Your limit of money that you're making is to be fairly low, and with today's housing, with the high cost, it's very hard to meet those guidelines. So, housing unit is affordable if the household, the family will not spend more than 33% of their income. Household earning 70% of the area median income can obtain a mortgage. And you need a deed rider restricting the value in perpetuity. So I want to just talk quickly about the current 40Bs. There are a couple on here, this Benjamin's Landing or Beaver Court. One of those is not actually a 40B, but we have them listed because they do have affordable units, and they're similar to the others there. A lot of them are a subdivision, and then there, of course, there are things like Franklin Heights. They're either garden style or things like that. These are home ownership, single family or condominium type 40Bs, okay? Then we have other type 40Bs. We have Franklin Commons, where you have 96 apartments. 63 of them are affordable. Residence at Union Place, there's a picture there of Union Place, is 300 apartments, 75 are affordable. Glen Meadow in back of this, again, 297 apartments, and they have a total of 73 of the units are affordable. Some of them are so-called workforce, and others are lower income, where 60% of the area median income qualify. And then we have the Westerly, which 70 units are available for households earning 80% or more. So we have 2 senior housing, one at Eaton Place, which is 50 units, which is completed years ago. Now Franklin Ridge, right in back of it, is being worked on. Below is an image of what Franklin Ridge senior housing would look like. On the right side here, we have 40Bs that are not built. One called Oliver Crossing now. That was actually Franklin Heights Parcel B up on Lincoln Street, which has 19 units of affordable. Medellin Village, as we mentioned, has been approved, and they have 8 units of affordable. And St. John's, which is before CBA right now, has 64 units, all of which would be affordable if approved. So we have because we had several 40B projects in front of us a year ago, it was hard. It was hard really to figure out which one is the way to go. 40B project to build mixed income housing under 40B initiative program. A 40B is a project that has local support, a friendly 40B. It has a contribution to the project can make to the community's needs, or contributions the developer agrees to make to meet local needs, infrastructure, public safety, land protection. Unlike traditional 40Bs, this allows municipalities to remain in control of most aspects of a project design and construction. So during 2022, there were several proposed friendly 40B projects coming forward, and the town staff didn't really know what to do with them. We talked to Jamie, we talked to a lot of people, and said, there's several projects here. Are they all going to just go through the regular ZBA project, and whoever gets first, ZBA will be deciding on all of these? But because none of them are, they really are a so-called friendly 40B situation in reality, because we don't need to accept anymore. We're over 10%. The town does not have to agree to any more. So the town administrator has tasked us with developing a preliminary process to determine if a project meets the needs of the town and follows the LIP process. So we developed a friendly 40B project preliminary review checklist, and the developer completes the checklist and submits it with other materials. And the town's point of contact, and it's the town planner in this case, receives the completed form, and the town begins a 30-day review of the proposed development. That 30-day review is really a three-step. It is a presentation by the applicant to the technical review committee, and we, like we do with all projects that come before us, we try to identify issues of concern and tell the developer our opinion on them, and mostly it is regulation related opposed to like or dislike. It is, we try to stick to the regulations and with the issues at hand. Then the applicant will go for a non-binding review by the planning board and a non-binding review by Conservation Commission. After that review, the applicant really needs to get a Department of Housing Community Development letter which acknowledges the number of units that will be accepted on the town's SHI. The town council is given a presentation. This is kind of a prelude, I think, tonight to that, but the applicant would present an overview of the proposed project and outline the benefits and gather feedback from the council. And then the applicant will submit a full application to ZBA for review and decision. I have to note that participation in this friendly 40B review process is not a requirement. It is just something we established to try to hash out what type project the town may want to accept, and others they may not want to accept. Again, you do have the right to not take on any 40Bs if you really want to do that. If you want to look at a 40B for what the benefits are to the town, you may consider all of those issues. But either way, it does go to the ZBA. The applicant could forget about the concept of this review process and actually go directly to the ZBA with an application. So, Mark, I'm sure, would like to clarify.
See, he already put his hand up.
There you go.
Mark?
So for clarification, once you hit the 10%, although you have the right to say no, you still have to, as the zoning board of appeals, entertain an application and go through a process. So whether it's friendly, as Brian indicated, because that would help to weight it, that other town boards have determined there's some value to the project, and kind of a suggestion to the ZBA to give a sympathetic approach to it. However, if it's a developer either could not get that designation or did not want to bother with that process, they have the right to file with the ZBA. In the course of the hearing, the ZBA would determine that the town was over 10%, but they would also have to go ahead and independently evaluate and make findings with respect to the proposed project during the course of the hearing.
Okay. So, yeah, we understand that?
Yep.
Everybody understand that? Okay. I have a question about the, how do we make sure when a house gets sold, an affordable, with a capital A, that has a deeded affordable right, is sold sold as affordable, not at market rate? Like, who keeps track of that when it gets sold?
So, as part of the initial process, there are documents put on record at the Registry of Deeds, which will show up in a title search indicating that the property has an affordable housing restriction. It has to be, and that's a spelled out document with very detailed technical process. So the problem generally isn't the resale so much. There's been two issues. One has been mortgage foreclosures, and either the failure of the foreclosing institution to comply with the process or the inability to find a qualified buyer. You only really have a specified period of time to do that as a town. We're notified, and then Maxine Kinhart, who's our person that handles affordable housing, would initiate a process to try and find a qualified buyer. The other really problematical situation was back during the last big housing boom, the one that led to the big crash. There was a lot of loose lending that went on, and a lack of care, and some unscrupulous people got loans on affordable properties far in excess of the restriction on the value, and then they were underwater, and they just walked away from it. So there's all kinds of problems, largely with the home ownership program, because you only have to qualify when you buy the place. After that, there's no restriction because as a practical matter, it's ownership. Whereas with rental, you have to be annually certified to qualify. So there's tighter restrictions on the rental than there is on the home ownership.
But we have Maxine that watches
She
that for
implements
us.
it, yeah.
Okay, it's good to have, I heard from somebody that in their son's town that recently a house had sold that was supposed to be affordable, but it went for market rate, and so there's a big, there's a big problem.
If you sell it in excess, the surplus goes to the town.
Okay,
The owner, in selling the house, and there's, also the problem is there was the deed rider, which the state generates, the standard legal form, has changed. There's the old deed rider and there's the newer deed rider. The newer deed rider, which is what you're exposed to now largely, is tied into, as Brian alluded to, not market rate for properties, but rather the ability, the percentage of median income, the ability of people to carry it. So the rate, so the old riders used to be set on a percentage of market value. So when the home
okay.
values went crazy, it's reduced, but it's still a grossly excessive figure that people cannot come up with, certainly a first-time homeowner. So those have been very problematical, but DHCD, as I said, has updated the rider, and now it is tied in, that permanent restriction, and it floats based on what's happening with mortgage rates and incomes and all that. So those are two factors that go in different directions. So Brian could give you this presentation in a month, and the figures could go up or down from what are in there, because they respond to the market as you plug them in.
right. Thank you, okay. Yeah, Colby?
Yeah, just one question I always had around these is, do you have information on how the actual funding from the state side works? Right, there's some benefit to the developer, right? Some money back for subsidized units?
Well, some of the projects are subsidized by the state, but not all, as far as, So really,
So if the state isn't coming in when it's first being built and saying, hey, we'll put this much money to help you build it, any other 40B project, offering those at reduced rates, they're getting nothing for?
Yeah,
Okay, Mark.
there are both federal and state programs. It depends on whether they're in force or not. But also, the developer is, again, by trumping the local regulation, can build a substantially increased density to what they would be able to build as of right. And so they're picking up, the premise is that they're picking up the profit that way.
Okay.
And in fact, there is a cap of 20% on their profit on 40B projects.
Cap on profits.
I have more.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so this is more just a point, but we accented one piece, which is that in talking about our inclusionary zoning process, we're talking about minimum 10%, but those don't help reach our 40B totals unless they put in 25%. That 15% gap seems like the opportunity for those incentives that we talked about, where really we want to encourage someone to go above and beyond, and make it worthwhile for them.
Yeah, the town could utilize incentives. We're going with a straightforward, the bylaw right now that's gonna go to town council. It's straightforward, 10% required once you get to 10 units, I guess it is now. So if it were a 40B, they would have to go, if they're in a multifamily development, they would have to go with 25%. Okay? But even at the 10% in the inclusionary zoning, if 10% is required, then at least we're keeping at the 10% that's going on the inventory, on the SHI. So we're not going to drop down substantially. If somebody had 100 units, 10 of those units goes on the SHI. So our percent would drop down a very little amount, very small amount. It wouldn't drop all the way down, So it's very important to have the inclusionary or something similar on any multifamily, so we don't end up going down quickly. Because we have had some larger developments that did not have any affordable units in them, and that hurts. It's great to have the units, but it does hurt the SHI substantially.
Mhm. Okay.
Thank you.
Patrick, I think you had a question?
Yeah, I think maybe, people at home, somebody explain who the zoning board of appeals, who they are and how they get on it.
Jamie?
Through you, Madam Chair. I maybe have Gus come up real quick to just give a
He's
quick
like-
on the ZBA. But before, to answer the first half of Patrick's question, so the ZBA are appointed, they're nominated by the town administrator, and they're ratified by the town council. There are 3 members that are all at large, and then 2 associates. This is very common in most communities. The exceptions to this rule, I'm not familiar, Gus, Mark, or Brian may be, but I am not familiar with any elected zoning board of appeals. In fact, I believe that's against state law, so you'd have to have a town charter change. And really now you're getting into what Boston and some others have with redevelopment commissions, right? Where you essentially assign away that power center off to a set entity that is solely in charge of those issues. The only other one thing I'd add, Madam Chair, is to Councilor Frangilla's question a moment ago, is he knows, but just for the record, the 10% piece, that's the cap under MBTA communities, which is disappointing, but just so people understand, as this bylaw goes through the planning board and hearing process, you're right, that gap is where there's an opportunity lost. We now can't do it within the half mile of the MBTA station because our outgoing governor capped it at 10%. And I'll just remind
Can't do it by
everyone.
rep.
Right. Well, that's a pretty big deal. But also only after basically dozens and hundreds of letters were sent to his office for the original regulations, did so many communities complain about that. It felt like the scraps at Thanksgiving dinner were thrown to people and said, well, you can do 10%, we'll allow you a couple of affordable units. But there is that gap, and Councilor Frangillo is accurate. That's a big lost opportunity, and hopefully the incoming administration will change something. Gus, do you want to just go through what the ZBA is basically and what their state relevance is?
It's changed a lot because of this non-binding suggestions, so to speak, with different boards. But before that, they would apply to me, and I would deny the project, the comprehensive permit, and get them on board with the ZBA. And they would have to hear that hearing within 30 days. We give out the notices, just like the planning board does, as far as what we need to send to neighbors. It's in the newspaper. Then once that 30-day mark hits, we have to have a hearing. And generally, they get continued in the beginning stages because everyone's asking for information that might or might not be on their application. They're also required, I don't know if it's a law but they're required to hire a consultant, and it's actually hired through the town, and they advise the town on the best way to hear what is being presented. It's a pretty complicated process. It takes several meetings. It's worked well, I think, is my opinion, that we have several in town that work very well. I don't know if that answers all your questions, or...
That answer your question,
Yeah.
Patrick?
Yeah.
Thank you, Gus.
There's a lot more to it, but that's the bones of it right there. And I think Franklin Heights was a recent approval, and there was a lot of back and forth, and the questions that came up were answered well. The consulting attorneys and the traffic study people that are involved do their due diligence, and the board reviews everything as well, and the decision is based on a comprehensive project that involves safety and the affordability component, and I think it's a good thing for everyone.
So when the application comes in first, you deny it.
I do.
So you have to go through, that step.
That's the official thing that I do. That's a state requirement.
Okay.
I write a denial letter, and in that denial letter, the hearing notices go out with that denial letter to the abutters and to the newspaper.
And then in that letter, does it say, you should send an application to the ZBA, or you've already done that and you already have a date for the
The
hearing?
official thing that I do
Yeah.
is I deny the project initially, and then they have, within 30 days, it has to be heard.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
kind of simplifying it down.
Thank you, Gus. I'm gonna go over to Mark now. Mark?
So that's the receiving end of this, but initially, the developer has to determine how they want to proceed, and generally, they have to go to Mass Development, which is a quasi-state agency, and get a site approval letter, particularly if they're proceeding straight under 40B. Then there's a whole process there. The municipality has the opportunity to comment during that. Frankly, Mass Housing generally rubber stamps those kinds of approvals, and then they file with the ZBA, the applicant or the developer. That's a big packet of supporting materials, again, required by regulations. The DHCD guidance on this is something 60-plus pages, even though the statute's only 3 or 4 sections of law. And so then, if you have a friendly 40B, it works kind of in reverse, because you work it out with the municipality, and then you file with DHCD
Oh, okay.
to get their determination that the project conforms to their regulations for, Brian's referred to LIPS, Local Initiative Programs. So then it ultimately does come back, and it still has to go through the ZBA process with the hearing and all.
So if you don't have 10%, then the
can show
developer gets that mass approval first,
The site, yeah.
the site approval first.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if we have over 10%, a friendly 40B comes in, we work together, we decide, and then they get the approval.
Or, again, that's assuming they're working cooperatively. They could decide unilaterally that they're going to simply file, regardless that you're over 10%, and they go to Mass Development for the letter. It's the same process. And then come to the town. We've had that happen, actually.
Okay.
And then just to complete the picture, the oversight is an agency within DHCD called the Housing Appeals Committee. Even though it's got that informal name, it's a very established administrative agency. Developer appeals, that's the Housing Appeals Committee. And then it very much depends whether you're over 10% or not, what happens up there. Ultimately, their decision is appealed to either the Superior Court or the Land Court, who has a limited review under the State Administrative Procedures Act. And just again to complete the picture, that was for developers who were unhappy with the results. Even if the developer's happy, the town's happy, abutters have an interest as well, and they can also take an appeal, which was what happened on Madeline Village. The private abutters took an appeal to the Superior Court.
Yeah, I remember.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mark. Do you have a question?
No, just a comment.
Okay, all right. I actually have one other question, and then I'm gonna ask if anybody else has any questions. So we have the St. John's. So when did St. John's come through? Because they're doing a different, it seems to me it's a different route. They're not gonna follow, it's not following the friendly 40B, but it's like, people have asked, like,
Yeah.
what's the difference between this process versus that process?
I believe they did what I alluded to. I believe they filed with Mass Housing or Mass Development, and then straight file with the ZBA instead of going
Okay.
to this informal process.
Through you, Madam Chair, and
know
essentially,
Jamie
you
and
know,
Brian.
Gus can probably answer this as well, because it's before the ZBA, but a lot of this, just for ease, so we're not going through the 60 pages of regs,
Yeah.
a lot of this is because it's all affordable, it's at low income, okay, 60 and 40% of the area-wide median income. So when you look at those numbers that Brian had up there a moment ago of 80%, a portion of those units cut that in half. And because there's heavy amount of state subsidies or federal tax credits, you know, kind of a potpourri, if you will, of stuff, Mark alluded to this a moment ago, it just depends on whether the federal government funds those types of credits and the budget, you know, it can go up and down over time. You can't really consistently always count on it. It's not like Franklin Ridge where you advocate for money and you get a grant, you know?
Right.
That's $4 million like in the bank to do certain stuff. That's not really exactly the way it works. But because they're going under a designation of 100% affordable and at those income levels, and as we've heard through the inclusionary zoning bylaw process, I think we've heard, you know, quite a bit, and I think the EDC and others have been very sensitive to the financing challenges for many developers at that level of affordability, right? Banks don't take a lot of flyers on that stuff for obvious reasons. It's a shame, but we know money's money, and that's the way it goes. And so you have a situation where a project like that essentially gets kind of you know, kind of cuts the line almost because of the demographic that's serving, in addition to the builder is obviously working on this project for many, many years, so there's a state developer kind of relationship
Yep.
about financing it. So that's why that one, just for simplicity purposes, is why that one's going a different route.
Okay, all right, thank you. I know that people have
Yeah.
wondered.
Absolutely.
And I just feel it's important to let people know.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna see if there's anyone in the audience that has any questions or comments. Come on up to the mic, let us know your name, street address.
Good evening, I'm Christy Apicella. I live at 27 Patton Road. I've communicated with many of you about the proposed development at 237 Pleasant Street for St. John's. So thank you for having this session. It's been very helpful for me to understand some of these processes and to hear the comments about how 237 is different from some of the other developments. I still have the question about if it's a friendly 40B or I don't want to call it an unfriendly 40B, but St. John's coming in, the way that development was filed, it doesn't seem to have had the same public process as, for example, the next item on this agenda, Grove Street, that's being presented before the Economic Development Committee. I understand Conservation Commission has commented, Planning Board has commented. It doesn't, I'm not seeing evidence of that happening for 237, and it's adjacent to the Delcart Conservation Area, so there's potential environmental impacts. I've personally raised some safety concerns, as have some of my neighbors, and I know those concerns are being heard, but I'm not understanding why some of the projects that are friendly are being vetted more transparently than it appears that 237 is.
Okay,
Brian, Brian?
we're gonna go to Brian
Yeah,
first.
Thanks.
I would love to try to answer that question. So, a year ago, and 9 months ago, and that ranged somewhere, there were several developers in town looking for developing a 40B project, which is the reason we decided that, or Jamie decided that we needed some sort of process to review these projects. So we developed the friendly 40B project review process, and when before it was actually presented to council, I believe, is when Pleasant Street project came in. So we hadn't formally said to everybody at that point. A week later, after, or a day later, maybe it was after it went to council, Jamie told everybody about it. So I think that they got in under the gun. Otherwise, we would have asked them to go through this process. But either way, a developer can go directly to CBA. So they're in their rights to do what they did. They did what the norm is. We were hoping that we would get in and, get everybody reviewed essentially and do the process for them as well as others. But they were the first to submit and go forward. That's all.
Well, first I want to make sure, Christie,
I had a question.
does that answer your question? Do you have a question from?
No, just.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It partially answers my question about the timing. The other part of it is that I understand that the zoning relief that an applicant can obtain through this process and for affordable housing, that I absolutely agree that community needs. I'm not opposed to the affordable housing. What I have raised concerns about is the process for the approval. So if the Zoning Board of Appeals still has to look at those impacts, the impression I'm getting from the Zoning Board of Appeals is that they can only require things of the developer if the town officials ask them to do that. And I don't know if I'm misunderstanding their purpose, or what can the town do to ensure that as this proposal goes forward, and on the slide, Brian, it did note, it said it was permitted and not built, and I don't believe it has been permitted yet.
Correct, yes.
So what can the town do for conditions of the permit that assure that the impacts of that development are understood and potentially mitigated?
Good question. We're going to go to Mark.
So regardless of whether it's friendly or not, the process in front of the ZBA is exactly the same. When the application comes in the first place, they send out notices to all the other town boards and commissions that they've had this filing, because they're going to essentially act as a super local board on behalf of all the other boards. An applicant on a comprehensive permit is required to list all the waivers that they want from the local regulation, all the zoning, local wetlands, any other regulations, water and sewer, whatever it is. They have to list them all, and the ZBA, as part of the decision, has to determine whether or not to grant each and every one of those. Now, typically, as I said, they will reach out to other town boards and commissions and the town staff for comments, which can be provided. They also have the ability to retain at the expense of the applicant such consultants as they feel are necessary to review the process, such as traffic engineers, wetlands engineers, whatever they feel is necessary based on what they're reviewing. I know that the town engineer has been involved in this process. I know it's been reviewed for the existence and proximity of wetlands. It's been reviewed from a traffic and safety standpoint, or that's a process ongoing, so generally people are aware of these things and are looking at them.
Jamie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in terms of the question that she had in terms of why are these different, they are inherently two completely different planets. So the one that's before, we'll hear from in a little while, is under the local initiative program. It's 25% affordable. There's a different financing model with it. And the one that's being proposed at St. John's is inherently a completely different project. It's 100% affordable. It comes with a tremendous amount of state support. As I said earlier, it basically takes a beeline, cuts the line to some degree. It's not really that quick, by the way. It's not like cutting the line in the supermarket. But essentially, they have a beeline right to DHCD for the purposes that I mentioned just a little while ago. There is no profit in that project other than what's capped under the law by the developer that's doing them. You know, the projects that are the friendly 40Bs that we're terming, that is a widely used term, it's not one just here. Many of the other 40Bs, just inherently, they're just two different, completely different projects altogether. I would mention one thing about, really quickly about the review process. One area I disagree with the commenter is both projects have been, all projects for that matter, are inherently transparent. The ZBA has already handled, I think, a half a dozen meetings on the project. There's going to be probably at least a half a dozen more before it finally actually, you know, gets approved. And the process that we laid out for friendly 40Bs is transparent, has a few extra steps in it to go vet through other boards. And even if there wasn't a 40B, there's still a planning board process, there's still a butter notifications, there's still publicly posted agendas, and there's a heavy amount of communication and collaboration between the town staff on every single housing project in the town of Franklin. We mentioned earlier about the tech review committee that we have at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays. That's Brian, Amy, Gus, myself, the town attorney, the town engineer, the fire chief, the conservation agent. We sit in this room, we talk to developers, applicants, homeowners, business owners, anybody that wants to come through. And we try to give them, you know, they try to propose to us and they say, hey, what do you think about this project? We do that to create a more efficient process actually at the planning board or ZBA level. And we do that so that when they file, they're filing concurrently and they're at least aware. There may be some tips that come up about, well, you might want to apply for a liquor license if you're a business, or what about the setbacks over here, or think about the stormwater bylaw. And so inherently, all of our town staff are talking on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, about all of these projects. And I do think that ultimately, the vast majority, if not all of the projects that are built in Franklin, do have a high level of transparency affiliated with them. And to finish off the question that was asked, whether it's the planning board whether it's the planning board permit, the ZBA permit, the conservation permit, any of those permits have the ability within law to have mitigation conditions for that development. And I think that that's what right now they're going through at the ZBA level, where they're doing the traffic studies and going through the peer review. And the ZBA eventually will look at a series of conditions that the developer has to adhere to. Maybe, you know, mitigation of traffic islands or signage or crosswalks. I mean, it could be a whole variety of things. And that's why having our town engineer and DPW on tech review committee, and Mike Maglio, our town engineer, also goes to all planning board meetings. So there's a lot of expertise in the room. I know that it can be anxious sometimes to watch the process go along, and it can take a long time. I've had many people tell me, you know, why does this take so long at the ZBA? You know, generally that's because these hearings do take a long time, because it does intend to vet out a lot of the issues that have concerned the staff, elected officials, business owners, and certainly residents. So I hope that goes a little bit further in answering some of the questions that were asked a few moments ago.
Thank you, Jamie. I think, so the question, I think there's like, so each step, each department could ask for mitigations. And the mitigations get, let's say, the traffic study, right? And so then where is that traffic study posted? When people discuss it, all that information, so the residents in the town can see all that information. Is that somewhere? Gus?
Madam Chair, that's posted on the ZBA website. All that information is uploaded. Casey Thayer does that for us when all the information comes in. And, you know, Christy and I have talked quite a bit about this, and I've heard everything she said and assured her that we're not done yet. You know, we're looking at all avenues. What the final decision will be, I think it's got to do with a multitude of things that we'll look at, and we're not quite done yet either. There's been no decision handed down, and I'm confident that between the police, fire, and DPW and Mike Maglio, that they're going to make sure that this project is is either approved or disapproved. If it is approved, it's gonna be approved in a way that's safe for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
And if, really quickly, Madam Chair?
Jamie?
I just want to emphasize to anyone listening at home, like, don't kill yourself reading these studies. It really, I know people want to read them, and and all the architectural designs are on the planning board website. You know, Amy did a great job putting up but for the average person, I respect the fact that it's extremely frustrating and very detailed and hard to read. Just pick up the phone. We're all here all day. Send us an email. Brian and Amy, myself, Mark, Gus, we all meet with citizens every day that have questions. It can save citizens hours and hours of heads being pounded against the wall trying to understand these very thick, deep studies. They're all online, but you know, I find that sometimes a 15-minute conversation on the phone is a lot of the path of least resistance, or citizens need to show up at meetings, email us, email the board's comments. Don't suffer in silence on these things. Just come in and talk to us. As Gus just said, and I think Christy and others can at least attest to, you may not always get exactly the answer you want. It may not be what you want to hear, but you're at least going to understand it, hopefully, in a better way. And your voice can, in a lot of cases, have a pretty big impact on these projects. So I know a lot of people call me a lot and tell me how frustrated and angry they are that they have to look through these complicated plans they don't understand. And that's okay. We're here to try to give them some assistance, too, on trying to help people understand what's actually going on right in their neighborhood. Thank you.
Glenn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the big takeaways from much of this discussion is the fact that even though we are in a relatively fair position to deny 40B projects as they come along, we shouldn't be, because we need to stay above our 10%. But we're not immune from 40B. I mean, if like projects like this one, where Jamie just so eloquently put, you know, they're looking to make every single unit affordable. That's something that the state is very desirous of, and we should also be desirous of having that. I think what it boils down to is trusting the process. You know, one of the things that I would hope as part of that particular project is that they make an effort, specifically in regards to the wetlands and other stuff like that, to reach out to Concom. They don't have to. They can request waivers and other stuff like that, because one of the things that the developers for Madeline Villages tried to do was basically get as many waivers from the ZBA as they could, including wetland waivers, without ever once contacting the Conservation Commission and getting their opinion or their thoughts on that process, which I thought was rather underhanded, but that's the rules under the ZBA, and they can request all these waivers, and the ZBA in return can in turn require a list of requirements that they need to go out and meet. But in the meantime, just skip out on asking opinions, thoughts, ideas, or whatever of all these other boards. So my hope is that as this process moves forward with this particular project, that they do their due diligence of reaching out to the appropriate commissions and committees, especially the Conservation Commission, in regards to how much of an effect that particular piece of property might have in that area. It's a valid question. I just hope they don't skip or try to skip that process.
Okay. Do we have any questions in the audience? Yeah. State your name.
Hi, Joe Halligan, 1 Newell Drive. I learned a little bit tonight from Brian's presentation. These friendly 40Bs, in my opinion, are a good way to plan the future of Franklin. Also an insurance policy down the line. I didn't realize that possibly by 2030, we might be under 10%. This is an opportunity for everybody involved to review this process, and going with a friendly 40B, we can get more out of the developers. Monetary gifts, sidewalks, walking paths. We can work with developers and get as much as we can out of them to ensure that the surrounding community and the people can enjoy the whole product, not just the people living there, as far as infrastructure, improvements, stuff like that. If we do get to 2030, which if we keep kicking the can down the road per se, these projects take 2-3 years to get occupied by the time they're built. It's 2023. We're talking 2026.
It's not that far away.
2030 is tomorrow. And we'll be sitting here going, oh my God, we should have dealt with these people when we could have got what we wanted. Now you get people rushing in and just building what they want, less control. Jamie did come up with a great plan. And if they follow these requirements and everybody's involved, I think it's a positive rather than waiting, kicking the can down the road and waiting for that, well, maybe we won't be 10% next year. And then all of a sudden, the statistics come out, permits are coming in, and we have no control of it. And I'd much rather see the town benefiting from projects, keeping us up to that 10 or above that 10%. There's 230, we'll be here tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Steve, do you have a question, a comment?
Yes, I did. Steve Sherlock, 10 Large Drive, Community Information Director for Franklin Matters. Several weeks ago, you had a wonderful presentation, which I learned a lot at, around 40R, and I didn't hear that tonight. Can somebody quickly explain what the two are related to, if they are related? I assume they are, but I'm just trying to put them together and haven't been able to yet. Thanks.
Mark?
So there's some overlap, but the focus is different. 40R is referred to as smart growth, transit-oriented development. It's for revitalization, redevelopment of downtown areas with connection to mass transit. And yes, there can be an affordability component, and really that's kind of a win-win the way that's designed, because the municipality gets credit for the affordable units if they're, and I believe it's a 20% requirement. The municipality gets the credit. The developer does not have the cap on profits that I alluded to under the 40B program. So it's got its own set of regs, but it's pretty much an independent, it's another tool in the box, if you will.
Thank you, Mark. Does that answer your question?
Thanks.
Okay, great. Is there anyone online that has a question? There's some people there. Give them a second.
Doesn't Mr. Chairman call it Zoom land?
Zoom land, yeah, well, I was TV land, Zoom land, online. Oh, there's a hand. Is that John?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, John, yes.
Hi.
Go ahead.
So I'm John Harding. I'm actually the project manager with the community builders working on the St. John's project. I apologize I couldn't be there tonight. I only heard about this meeting yesterday and had another public meeting I had to go to before. Overall, I think everyone explained our situation very clearly. I just wanted to add that we have presented to the Conservation Commission. They requested that we present in front of them, and we were happy to do it a few months ago. My understanding is that they're supportive of the project, but don't need to take it from me.
Thank you, John.
Can I ask him a question?
We have a question for you.
Mr. Harding, may
Sure.
I ask, as part of that presentation to the Conservation Commission, were there any specific requests in regards to the effects that this project may have on the local wetlands? What was your basic presentation about, if you don't mind me asking?
So my presentation to the Conservation Commission was just general overview of what the project would be, where it would be located, presenting our wetland study of the site. There was one specific comment that they made. They were requesting that we build additional trails connecting our project to the existing trail network in Delcart. That comment had actually been vetted out earlier in the technical review committee with Jamie and the rest of the team. And we had already committed to doing that prior to the Conservation Commission meeting. So that one was pretty easy.
So after the presentation, did they make any comment in regards to any negative feelings towards the project being that close to Delcart?
No, they were happy to hear that we weren't on any wetlands. Yeah, I think we were able to vet out any concerns that they might have with the technical review committee earlier.
Thank you, John. Actually, Brika Lai is on, and she has her hand up, so maybe she's our conservation agent. Brika Lai Goodlander.
Hi, thanks everyone. Sorry, I'm actually on my couch, so I'm not going to see my camera.
What?
That yes, the Conservation Commission did request that the applicant come before them as a general business discussion. Actually, the proposal is outside of conservation jurisdiction. That is fine. So no matter what, conservation really has no say project. The Conservation Commission chair, he did write a letter of support. However, if the project does come within Conservation Commission jurisdiction, that is a separate permit. So that would be for trails within buffer zone, that would be for trails connecting Delcart. And at that time, the language in that letter is worded as such that this letter of support does not supersede any down the line permit. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Brika. Okay, Glenn?
That, she said exactly what I expected there. It is outside the jurisdiction of Concom.
Right.
And because it goes solely through ZBA, correct me if I'm wrong, in regards to any 40B that comes across. So for all intents and purposes, I'm sure they're gonna be fair neighbors, because they did make at least a good effort to go to Concom, and that was very nice of them that they did. Thank you for doing so. That at least shows that they're making an effort to be, mindful of the impact that they may have on the environment. And hopefully, the neighbors around there will continue to voice their opinions on if anything that they feel may be impactful that may or may not be overseen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor Jones. All right, so I think we've answered and talked about all the questions we had, and we might actually get to move on to the second item on the agenda.
6 items?
What do you think?
Sounds great.
Okay, all right. I don't even have my agenda. Here it is. Sorry, everybody. I've been writing notes on my other piece of paper. So we're gonna move on to the second, which is a discussion and project presentation of 121 Grove Street, and this is our first friendly, friendly 40B, that has gone through the, new process.
Thank you,
Jamie?
Madam Chair. While our customers are getting set up here, I just want for the EDC's purpose, it's a really important point, and just for everybody at home, I want to make sure everyone understands there's no vote, there's no approval. That's not why we're here tonight. This isn't for a vote. The folks, as you can see by the meeting packet materials, have gone through the friendly 40B process already. Planning Board issued a thorough letter of comments to consider. And then the Conservation Commission has also done the same, but the proponent is working through the Conservation Commission as required to do. The Town Council, Planning Board, or ZBA, none have any role or nor authority in the delineation of the wetlands and the approval of that. Madam Chair, why we're here tonight is this project proposal at some point needs to put before the full Town Council, and as we've done many other times, trying to look at projects like this and have an opportunity to kind of talk about them, as mentioned earlier, and just transparently having public discussions about these things, I think is, and I know you agree, is very positive and good to try to make sure there's tape for people to watch and listen to the issues and listen to the ideas, the concerns or comments any of you have. And I'll be working with, obviously, the chair of the council in the near future to talk to them about coming into a full council meeting. So tonight's the first opportunity for people to share their thoughts. And it looks like the PowerPoint's up. I delayed long enough.
Yeah, excellent. Good
So
job,
it's back to
Jamie.
you, Madam Chair, if
Good job.
there's anything else you want to mention.
Did you just say tape?
Tape? Oh.
Maxell XL2s, Glenn. We'll be burning CDs soon,
I
too.
also think it's really important, I'm just gonna add a little bit on to what Jamie said, not his joke about taping, but, cause then it shows how old he really is.
Sorry, you'll be on YouTube.
But, I mean, I don't even, 8-track, right?
Vinyl.
So,
You're in vinyl now.
but it's really important, I think, for us to actually be able to talk about the process. Because
Right.
I think a lot of people don't, we don't really, there's not, like this, the friendly 40B process that you put together doesn't exist for other things. Like, some of us, like me, like to know every step of the process and like a timeline of projects and things like that. But, and maybe the person who stood up and asked the questions, maybe she's a lot like me. And like, we like to know what the next steps are gonna be and what's involved. So that's why I'm glad that you guys are here tonight with us. And I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna, I don't know who wants to start, but I'm just gonna let you guys introduce yourselves and have fun.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for entertaining us this evening. My name is Richard Cornetta. I'm the attorney working with the applicant Fairfield Residential. And to my right is Janice Hurst. She has been responsible for getting us connected. And Rob Hewitt is the lead for Fairfield Residential that will take us through what we believe to be a very exciting project that is, on the heels of what we just heard, is a friendly 40B. Administratively, I think Jamie has taken you through. We've appeared before the Technical Review Committee last year. We've also appeared before the Planning Board, who has issued a very informative letter commenting on the project. And we've also appeared before the Conservation Commission. And I believe we're still in the process of identifying the wetlands areas. So we're still very preliminary, and we felt that it was a good idea, given the interest, the local interest in both inclusionary zoning and the 40B concept, that we would come here and speak to you and and solicit your opinions about what we think, as I say, is a very exciting project. The location of this project, not to step on Rob's presentation, but it's on Grove Street, 121 Grove. It's an interesting site, and I just want to highlight some of the points that I think the presentation will bring out. But it's an interesting site because it provides us a size and scale that will allow us to make a meaningful contribution to the SHI, the affordable housing stock. This would propose approximately 85 affordable units, which is a pretty good bang for your buck. And but I should also mention it is an apartment style proposal, so the total number of units would be counted toward that inventory. And the interesting thing about this site also, because of its location, there are no direct residential abutters. Even though this project is residential in nature, when you introduce a project of a size of this proposal, oftentimes in a community like Franklin, where it's primarily single-family homes, it can be somewhat disruptive to a neighborhood. But in this particular case, we are fortunate enough that we do not have that. It is in an industrial zone, but it is neighboring or close to residential neighbors. I don't want to offend those that are further down on Grove Street. There are residential parties that do exist on Grove Street, but where we are located, it is not. And it's also an area in town where traffic is always a concern, particularly when you're introducing a proposal like this. Everyone's concerned, well, how is this going to impact an already taxed traffic system in the town of Franklin? What we have here is a property that is located naturally in an area where you can use Grove Street as kind of an ability to get from north to south along in Franklin, and more importantly, access the highway system 495 without really overly taxing the 140 corridor. So I mention those points because as we go through the presentation, I think it's important to understand and see the positives in such a proposal like this. And the other thing, before I turn it to Rob, that I will mention is all the discussions we've had tonight. And by the way, they were very informative from the town parties, and we commend them for doing it. The one thing that we notice on the private side when you look at making a proposal for residential development is there a demand for it? And I think if we've learned nothing from Franklin for All and inclusionary zoning, we realize that there is a huge demand for housing and, more importantly, affordable housing. And so whether this is called a 40B, whether it's called a 40R, or whether it's just simply something that is being proposed, I think the underlying objective here is to create desperately needed housing. Otherwise, these guys wouldn't be here. And I should mention Fairfield Residential. Their name may seem familiar. They're a national residential development firm. In the last 35 years, they are responsible for over 100,000 apartment-style residential developments in about 40 geographical areas. In Massachusetts, they have a couple of, there's a project up in Chelsea. I believe there is one in Stoneham. And most notably, they are the party that developed Station 117, which is the project, the 257-unit apartment-style project that's located down on Dean Avenue, which I think it was quite a success. And so I guess that's a good segue to Rob, is that not only do we have a unique piece of property here in town that with a unique opportunity to create affordable housing, but we're also dealing with a proven commodity in Fairfield. They've had a history here in Massachusetts, they've had a history in Franklin, and they are very familiar with working with the town. And I think that if you haven't had the opportunity, take a ride down and take a look at what they've done. I think it's an impressive development, and I think it works very well with that neighborhood. So with that, I turn our presentation over to Rob. He can take you through the project.
Thank you, Rich. Great points, and I'll emphasize some of those as we go through. But just off the cuff, this was a very informative presentation by your panel of experts tonight. I wasn't anticipating that, but it was, I really enjoyed it. It reminds me of, being in a university lecture, and then at the end of the lecture, you get a practice problem, something to take home and work on. Well, I think that's what we're talking here. This is, as Rich said, it's an opportunity just not only for Fairfield to develop another apartment-style development, which is all that we do. In Franklin, we had a great experience, both entitlement-wise. That was a special permit and rezone, was not a 40B. That was 100% market rate, and that was done, we completed it about a year and a half ago. So as several people have mentioned, these projects take a long time to entitle, design, then construct, lease up, and then operate. So we're really thrilled with how Station 117 at Dean Avenue turned out. Both the residents are very happy, we're happy with the product. We had a lot of collaboration with the town during the entitlements, stormwater, architecture, wetlands, planning, sidewalk to curb, materials, everything was debated, and I think it was a great execution by both the town and by Fairfield. I'm also happy to offer any practical experience that you might have questions of me. I've done a lot of development in Massachusetts, maybe a third of them are 40Bs, probably about a dozen over the years. So I've been through it with a lot of different communities, and I know it's always controversial, there's a lot of questions, it's a strange process, but I've been through it from the other side, so happy to answer any questions as candidly as I can. Just a few notes as you're going through. Some things that stuck to me was that 40B, like any development process, works better when it's collaborative. So the process I like to do is almost exactly what the town process has been. I like to go in and meet with the planning board, even though they're not the approval authority for 40B. They're often the expert in planning and those regulations, so I always go and see them. Definitely I always stop and see the conservation early, since they are very informative about where you can build and whatnot. So we're happy to do this collaborative process. We've been to all the boards. This is sort of our last stop before we come to the town council. We're beyond the 30-day limit because we took the advice of the Conservation Commission, and we've gone ahead and filed for our ANRAD. We've had a number of hearings, and we're currently going back and forth on the actual limits of the wetlands. We want to get that established before we have anything final, because that has a big impact on our site plan, the overall density, and it's just information we can use. So I'm here tonight to provide you with information about what we think we can do here, about the site, about the process, but I also am looking for any feedback that you might have now or might provide later. We've gotten some great responses from the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. We're in the process of wrapping that into our plan, and we will be updating that before we come to the Town Council to incorporate the changes that we can. The other thing I've noticed from my other experience in other towns is that We always have a waiting list for the affordable units. So even though it's difficult to qualify, you can only make not enough money, and there's a small window, we always have a waiting list. And there's a very discrete process we go through to award those units. Those units almost always don't turn over because people stay. Because we develop the units, they look exactly like the market rate units. You can't tell they're affordable units.
Okay.
So you have an opportunity to be in the middle of a great community, and most people stay for a while. And I was glad that it was pointed out that HUD sets the rents. We don't set the affordable rents. We can't charge $1 more or less. We have to stick to the guidelines, and we do. The other thing, it's not just about affordable housing, it's about housing in general. Rental housing provides another option for people. Mostly it's sort of at the beginning of your career before you can afford a house, or at the end when you're sick of the house, but you want to stay in the community. Those are kind of our two, and we have everybody in between.
We have a lot of people at the other end, too.
So that's what we see. We provide not only just affordable housing, but housing of all kinds. So we try to do a wide variety of unit sizes and styles and prices to hit as big a market as we can. And I think all the communities we've developed in, it's always controversial at the start because it's changed. Once it's built, developed, I think it's uniformly welcomed in the town and provides a lot of options for people. Just last point on the affordable units. In my experience, most of the people who apply are from that local community or the adjacent communities. I sometimes hear in the hearings that there's a perception that people are traveling to find, move into the communities. It's almost always local, and we provide a local preference. We can provide up to 70% preference for local residents first, so they get to the top of the list on the waiting list, and we always accommodate that. Affordability, we always agree to keep the units affordable in perpetuity as part of the entitlement process. And so for rental housing, it's not as difficult as for the for sale housing with the changing of the mortgages. So if we agree to 100% in perpetuity, it'll stay that way forever on your list. And again, just pointing out that even though only 25% of the units in our development are rented at affordable rates, 100% of those units, every unit, gets counted on the SHI and kind of goes to your list. So I've worked with a lot of towns who are close, or just over, or just under the limit, and want to pick a development that meets their criteria in the right location, the right spot, the right design, and we've kind of helped them get to the point where they want to be. So we're here to be collaborative, and I'll run you quickly through the project. Just know that everything is draft at this point. We're still collecting input, and our final application is yet to come. So thank you for that intro, and Janice, next slide, thank you. As I mentioned, we're a national developer, but we are locally based. Janice and I work and live in Massachusetts. I've always developed in Massachusetts, both for Fairfield and for a few other companies before that. The office originally opened in 2001, long before I joined. They've done a lot of projects in and around the areas, mostly in the suburbs, 95 in. Rich mentioned some of our most recent projects and what we're currently working on. You can see the towns. I won't go through the list, but our star, of course, is Dean Avenue. One of the reasons we wanted to come before you, even though we know it's at your discretion since you're over your 40B limit. We think it's a great opportunity for the town in a good spot. So next slide, Janice, thank you. This is our team. We have a full team of professionals that will be presenting, preparing those reports that Jamie mentioned that sometimes get wordy. But most of these professionals will be peer reviewed by the planning board or the Conservation Commission. It's a very rigorous process. That's why it typically takes at least 6 months of hearings to get through the process and answer everyone's questions to their satisfaction and get to the decision point. Next slide. This is just reiterating that we've been through all the steps except going to the town council in your local process. And then after that, we would, if it was supported, we would go to the zoning board with that process. So we're planning around 300 units. That will depend on the final delineation of the wetlands, everyone's comments, thoughts. We feel this is a good scale for this site, which is 32 acres. So we're at about 10 units per acre, which is less than some of the thresholds. I think the new MBTA Communities Act is at 15. It's a nice suburban scale that we've done in a lot of other towns similar to Franklin. And as Rich mentioned, our Dean Avenue project was 257 units, and I think that's been integrated into the community and really has been working well. So we'll have 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. The state does require 10% 3 bedroom units, so we have to comply with that, and that would be our desire to do 10%
Of the affordables.
of all the units. Yeah, the affordable units, they have to be exactly equal, so it has to be 25% of the 3 bedrooms, 25% of the 2 bedrooms, 25% of the 1
Okay.
have to be affordable, and so that's gets approved by the state and monitored annually. So we do a lot of amenities like you would see at Dean Avenue if you've been. Not just, you know, the clubhouse and the fitness and the pool that everyone does, but we're doing more and more work from home space. Every project, it gets larger and larger because so many more people are working from home. So we're trying to accommodate that, not only in the clubhouse where we have a big co-working space, kind of like a WeWork setup, but also a lot more dens, built-in desks, cubbies in the apartment where you can work. Because that's been really well received by the market. We're doing a lot more outdoor amenities, particularly on sites like this where we have acreage to work with. Pets are huge in apartments as other places, so we have a separate dog park and pet wash and cater to the pets. Sometimes we do community gardens. We've been doing pickleball courts and outdoor active things lately. On this site, we'll have at least 3 acres, probably more, of just undisturbed wetlands that we will keep that way, adjacent to the state forest. Next slide. So we're planning a combination of 4- and 5-story wood frame buildings. We have currently shown in the site plan, which you'll see next, 5 buildings. That's our standard product. We're building that in a number of communities right now. We have elevators in all buildings, bike storage interior, roughly 50-50 1s and 2s, not including the 10% 3 bedrooms, which we're required to do. The 25% affordable, of course. A lot of our apartments, I would think, count as workforce housing as well, because they span the price range and it's less intensive than buying a house. It's a way to stay in a community, come to a community. So we see a lot of that. As I mentioned, 10 units per acre, typically around 1,000 square foot average. The 1 bedrooms be a little smaller, the 2 bedrooms be a little larger. That's our average. We've found that parking between 1.5 and 1.8 spaces per unit is what the market currently uses and demands. I do see that going down in the future, but it hasn't happened yet. We're seeing more demand for electric charging, so we're doing more and more of that, and accommodate everybody's needs. So without further ado, this is the 32 acres. We'll show some context in a minute, but basically, top of the plan, left of the plan is the state forest. Grove Street is along the right side, and then that little square out of the bottom left corner is the substation. So right across from, I think it's New England Appliances. Yeah, industrial across the street on Grove Street. Next slide. Again, that shows just the context. We do have the power lines kind of transversing the slide there along our kind of left border. Next, please. Typical elevation, we haven't designed anything for this site yet. As I mentioned, we're getting feedback. Most of the site is sloping, so we expect that we would have 4 stories on one side, 5 stories on the other in most of the buildings. This is an example from another project that shows kind of that style of architecture we did in that project. Again, it's Grove Street. The green is mostly the state forest. The Station 117 at Devon Avenue, our former project there, is shown along the rail lines. That's about 2 miles from this site. We're about 4 minutes or 1.8 miles from the commuter rail at Forge Park, and also the retail right at the highway interchange. So from a resident perspective, it's got a lot of the things people are looking for. It's got a lot of open space, greenery. You're not in the middle of a dense urban environment. You've got easy access to the highway without a lot of congestion. You can actually go either way from this site and get onto 495 quickly. We've got retail, stone's throw away, and then the commuter rail, which now that COVID is over is rapidly regaining its former glory. As I mentioned, 32 acres. We did go to the board to make sure that the structures that are there, which are basically old farmhouses, are not historical. We've got that determination already. Other than the wetlands and an intermittent stream, there's no sensitive areas like for endangered species or wildlife. It's not in a floodplain. It's not in a wellhead protection. As Rich mentioned, we don't have direct residential abutters, and we believe that there's adequate sewer in Grove Street based on our discussions with the town, so we don't have Title V issues. This is just our survey that will be presented as part of our application. We don't need to belabor this. We all know there's housing needs in this state, and probably in Franklin, you would agree. And our whole business is meeting that need across the country, and my business is meeting that need in Massachusetts. Next. I've covered most of this, but you know what we see not only for the affordable units but for all the units is empty nesters, singles, young families that are just getting started before they buy the house, and workers in the area that work along 495 or in Franklin or surrounding towns. Next. Benefits from our perspective for this site. The large site provides a lot of open space, screening, not that sort of dense infill environment. We have enough room for all the amenities we like to do, both inside and outside, for people, for dogs, for bikes. Excellent proximity to the highways for commuting, both on the highway and the commuter rail, and shopping. So kind of meeting all the residents' needs. Next. I mentioned under 2 miles to the train station and to the retail. And not, you know, we highlighted in yellow around, you know, Main Road that we just traveled to get here and all the congestion that we all know. We won't add to that because we're sort of parallel to town along 495. Next. Another amenity for our residents is the Franklin State Forest, which is a great resource. There's actually a trail that comes through the site, and it's marked private property, but still on the site. We would maintain that and you know, enhance that going through the site and allow that public access. We know there's plans in town to expand this kind of multi-use path along Grove Street, eventually connecting to the rail trail, Southern Trunk. I can never say it. But
Just stick with the acronym, SNAP.
Yeah, SNAP. Okay.
Forget the.
So the New England.
I was trying to sound.
I know,
yeah,
it's a tongue twister.
SNAP. So we're very excited about that. And we'd be happy to help with that connectivity, and particularly along our site. And as Jamie mentioned, there's always mitigation to mitigate any impacts we have from traffic or residents. So one of the nice things about a larger scale development is we have a little more ability to help for special projects that might benefit the town and particularly would benefit our residents. As I mentioned, you know, this is a different type of housing than single-family houses and provides an option for people, which is in high demand. That's why we're here and why we're developing in many other places. It's not required, but we always hire an outside fiscal consultant to work with the town to determine the actual cost of town services versus the revenue that we would produce from taxes. So our consultant talks to the police and the fire, determines how many calls are expected from the police and the fire, what that costs, what it costs for a school child to be educated in town, and then looks at the fiscal revenue. So just some highlights. We did a preliminary study just for this exercise, and we would enhance that if we went to the zoning board. But significant increase in tax revenue. I think the current taxes are low since it's a very low density single family, about 13,000, I think. We're projecting more than 800,000 once fully developed. And we have a lot of experience with that from Dean Avenue, so we know what the tax bills are in Franklin. We've talked internally with the Technical Review Committee. We think there's ample infrastructure, water, sewer. Sorry, just go back a minute. And lots of emerging retail and different uses. There's a lot of gyms. The brewery, which John Shipe, who put this presentation together, is very fond of, 67 Degrees. And so we like the sort of mixed use and what's happening on Grove Street. Jobs, schools, shops. Next. Obviously, we would contribute towards the state's goals and the town's goals for affordable housing and for housing in general. Roadway improvements along Grove Street will be part of our traffic study. We've already been identified 6 intersections through our technical review session that should be studied as part of that traffic report. We mentioned the trail going towards SNET. Our initial estimate was 43 school kids. Most of those kids come from the 3 bedrooms and from the 2-bedroom units. A lot of data that we use from other multifamily developers in town, looking at how many school kids there per unit, and then estimated for this. Fees, building permit fees and sewer connection fees, of course, we would be required to and would pay, as well as any mitigation that was required or made sense for both parties. Next. Just next steps after we go to town council, we would go to the zoning board. And as that process has been detailed extensively tonight, so I won't go through it, but there'll be a lot of public hearings. Usually we'll do traffic over 1 or 2 hearings, stormwater over 1 or 2 hearings, architecture, etc. Both with the town's peer review consultants that's paid by us through a process with the town and through our consultants. And we come to some collaboration and some consensus on all those points before the hearing gets closed. Next. Again, just pointing out, most of our traffic will go along Grove Street and out to the highway. Usually we're focused a lot on the visual impacts on neighbors and lights, and we always, don't let light stray outside of our property or noise, and we're a very good neighbor. But in this case, we have state forest and then the power station, which we will be screening ourselves from. Next. Again, connectivity of the trails benefits everyone. Next. All this is kind of the end product after all the hearings through the zoning board. So really, we're here just to preliminary present the idea, get any feedback. We're gonna boil that all together after we meet with the full town council and then determine our next steps. We did talk about waivers. You know, we can ask for waivers. They're not always granted in my experience. Ones that are reasonable are. The major waivers we would need for this are for height. Only 3 stories is allowed in the industrial district. We're asking for 4 to 5. There's a few setbacks. There's one building that's close to Grove Street that was something the planning board suggested we look at moving back to not infringe on that setback, so that's one thing we're studying. There's a little more wetlands than we expected. We're currently finalizing that delineation. We might combine a building, we might eliminate a building to accommodate the wetlands. So plans in flux, but we're getting close to a conclusion. Next. This just was copied from before, and we'll just end on one of the Dean Avenue pictures at the end. For anybody who hasn't been here, yeah, keep going.
Is that Milford project being under construction right off of 495?
Yeah, we're about a month from final completion. We've started leasing that project.
You see it on, if you're going north on 495, before you get to 85 on the right.
Exactly, the 85 is the exit, and we called it, the marketing name is the Quill. Yeah, you can see it from 495. So that was a 40B project that it started by someone else. We completed, worked with Milford, and it's 3 buildings that are 5 stories and a clubhouse. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer anything about 40B in general or this project or
Well, thank you for that. I was actually gonna ask you, I might have missed it, but so just the amount of units, so it was like, so you said there were 300 right now in this proposal and this plan, but it's ever changing, right? So did you say how many 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms you were thinking about having? I probably missed it, right?
Yeah, no, it's roughly 45% ones, 45% twos, and 10% threes.
Okay. So we know that whatever it ends up, I mean, the total number, whatever it ends up, that's what you're gonna try to, that's your
that would
ratio?
be our ratio. That worked very well at Dean Avenue, so we know the market pretty well here, so we think that'll hit it.
And I have one more question, then I'm gonna go to my fellow counselors, because I know they want to ask questions. So have you thought, do you have any preliminary traffic data about how many cars and trucks, extra traffic you will be from the project yet?
We did a preliminary look just to see if we would overburden any of the intersections nearby, because that can be a deal stopper. And so our traffic doesn't significantly downgrade any of those intersections, which is kind of the threshold that the traffic engineers speak to. But
do they say like a percentage of extra cars, or?
I don't recall, but it wasn't
Okay.
a significant number.
Jamie's like.
I'm just gonna try to boil it down for the folks at home that don't want to read the study. On the southern half of Grove Street, just to illustrate a contrast, when 210, 160, 164, 158 all got redeveloped, all of them did traffic studies around the same time, and it showed a lot of red. Okay, like literally spots on the map on the traffic study that said red, and I think we all know what that means. And essentially, with the traffic light and at least the intersection redesign at Grove in Washington, there's at least some, I think, I'm sure, acknowledgement that those improvements will help anything that would go on Grove Street, right? Whether it be housing, but also commercial, industrial. I got an update today, by the way, on the traffic light. It's still going to be several more months. Just a heads up, Rob, if you order a traffic light, it takes a couple of years now.
I've experienced that.
Yeah, it's surreal. But I can't speak to the northern side. And I think the traffic engineers, both the preliminary as well as the peer review, will help illustrate what that exact impact is. And obviously, the kind of greens and yellows,
Right.
kind of result in at least telling people that it's not as extreme as the oranges and reds that came up on the southern half. So with all that being done, I'm obviously probably speaking for many in the community that we're all curious to see how the peer review would come out on the traffic study to see kind of what mitigation, if any, would be required. And as folks know, we are repaving this year Lower Grove from Washington all the way up to Kenwood Circle.
Right.
As we talked about at the last council meeting.
Yeah,
So,
that's great.
So it's just a couple thoughts.
Well, when you think about, like, if you have 1 to 2 spaces per unit, right, so then there's 300 units, 55% of those are your 2 and 3 bedrooms, so then you could have maybe, let's see, 300,
Lot of
maybe
cars.
450 cars, maybe? Would that be, like, something like that, right? Maybe?
Yes, I think basic math tells us that,
Yeah.
Council Hamlin. The one caution I would say is, I think the traffic review in this case is probably one of the most critical elements of this. Why? When NETA proposed the facility, it was pre-pandemic. They had started going through the process and clearly showed, based on driving patterns and the customer drives that were going to go there, that they needed to, part of the mitigation from that project was through the host community agreements to help fund that intersection.
Yeah.
As they were going through the planning board process, it all changed. Then they were given the license to do delivery, they were online purchasing. The pandemic changed all that for them, and the traffic counts changed. I see here a unique feature of the work from home element being built into the marketplace. I am way underqualified to possibly try to understand what that means. Out Beaver Street, north and south on Grove, there's 3 avenues out, and I think, any traffic consultant that's hired on behalf of Fairfield, but also the peer review, I imagine would take in this new dynamic of the work from home spaces, the cubby holes, all the different features that obviously I think, they're arguing the market, is looking for.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't know.
I mean, we
think-
don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, we're almost like in uncharted territory on how this work from home concept, and not only that, just how new housing being built with the work from home being built into the housing.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I haven't really, I've heard of a little bit, but hadn't seen it really in Franklin yet. I don't know how that will fare. There
Yeah,
are
and
people
I-
that
It's-
are way more qualified than me
And
to
I don't,
predict that.
the traffic engineers have not caught up to this phenomenon, and I think it'll lag, so
Okay.
Okay.
we'll still be looking at, this is what typically happens in a apartment community, that's the data they'll look at. But you're right, we're seeing it in all our communities that, people aren't leaving at 8:30 and coming home at 5.
Right.
They're
Right.
in and out constantly through the day
Right.
with no particular patterns. And we used to visit our clubhouse and our work from home spaces, which used to be like a little business center about the size of this table. And there was never anybody there. Now you go and you wonder, do people work outside of the home at all?
Right.
They're just
Right.
teeming with people. So I think it's a different dynamic. We don't fully understand it yet, but it's definitely changing a lot. So
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, before I forget, that, that the EV chargers are really super important. And another thing I think about a lot is that, with the cost of electricity and the cost of heat and all that, they might be affordable to rent, but are they gonna be affordable to live in, right? So I'm really into green things. And so I was thinking it would be nice if you had carports that had solar panels, and you had solar panels on top of all your buildings, and it gets I get kind of crazy that way, but and a green roof. You could have the first green roof in Franklin, and maybe the gardens are up there because there's a lot of deer in Franklin, and the deer are gonna eat everybody's garden. So, but I want everybody else to have a chance to talk. So I'm gonna call on Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got 3 basic questions. My first question is actually directed towards Brian Taberner, if he has a second. One of their requests, Brian, is a waiver to allow them to build in an industrial zone, which I know as we've discussed many times over the years, that particular zone has an array of economic overlays, everything from marijuana to medical to whole tech and everything else that will be impacted by losing this much acreage of land in that area. How much do you think this is going to impact our future economic development in regards to our industrial properties like that, by giving up this much acreage?
Well, to be honest with you, this property has, it's been for sale or on and off the market a lot of years. They've tried to sell it off multiple times. One time they wanted 6 million or more or whatever a long time ago. I was always hoping that it would be a industrial or a high-tech use eventually. Now the markets, the real estate markets have changed substantially in the last 5 years in a big, big way. So whether you get a high-tech manufacturer or some kind of an office headquarters or anything in a location like that, there are, because of all the wetlands in that area, you're going to end up with a similar situation where you would have access roads, and it wouldn't be like, you can't get a 200,000 or 300,000 square foot office building, warehouse in there. It's a different type of, I always hope that, to be honest with you, the property owners, they deserve to sell the property, and these individuals deserve to look at developing. You're right, it is an industrial zone. We don't have a lot of land left, so that is something that the town should consider. But
Brian, one of my major concerns is, we've had the first 40B that went under the radar over in an industrial zone over at the border of Bellingham, and now we're going to lose even more industrial space. I'm pretty sure it says industry need not wish. We're going to continue to keep losing that land towards what could be potential future economic development. That's kind of my thought when it comes to that particular zone, is that's kind of, for the most part, that's really where we have a good portion of our tech in our industrial base is on Grove Street.
Absolutely.
To have it impacted by additional housing, how much is that going to affect our future economic development in the town, in lieu of trying to actually garner more revenue for the town through economic development? Just to finish that one question is, what are your thoughts on that?
well, I think any friendly 40B is it's somewhat of a political decision. Do you want it? You want more housing? Is this what you want, or do you want to go in another direction? Like I said, I would love to see that property for high-tech office, any number of things. It's exactly what we wanted in that region. We've created economic opportunity areas. We've done a lot of different things to attract that type of development over the years. And on another note, our tax, the income coming in from our tax revenue is increasingly more and more residential over the years, as far as percentage of revenue coming in.
Right.
It'll get to a point, the concept that, I hope they don't do it in the near future, but somebody will say, well, let's have a split tax rate again and all the other issues. And we need a commercial industrial tax base.
We do.
That is healthy, and I think that is the reason more than anything else, that is the reason an area like that will stay industrial or commercial. But it's really, like I said, it is more political type of, it's not a planning. If it was up to the planners, we would be, I'd be ruling the world a different way. But
Right.
It's not the way it goes. So it's really not my, I gave you an opinion that I would have loved to see that area. I would have loved, the Westley, I would have loved that to be industrial
Yep.
or commercial headquarters in that area. It really is the way things are. It's up to you, it's up to the council, at the ZBA.
Thank you,
That's,
Brian. I appreciate that comment. My second question is in regards to projected revenues. On your slide, based on 300 apartments, based on 45% one bedroom, 45% two bedroom, 10% three bedroom, projected 43 school-age students, which I think is a low, especially when you start throwing in the three-bedroom units. I have 3 bedrooms at my house. I have 5 kids in a 1,500 square foot house. And it doesn't take much. I have 4 kids in 1 bedroom. And I've said that before many times. If you can build a bedroom, you can put kids in it. So, but anyways, 43 school-age children based on your estimates, at roughly $15,500 per pupil expenditure. That's the rough estimate on what the school charges for students. That comes out to $666,500. That's 83% of the projected revenue that's going to be off of this property.
Jamie?
Through you, Madam
Is
Chair.
that-
Just to note, Councilor Jones's math is accurate under the scenario he proposed. However, by the time, as Joe had pointed out, Mr. Halligan earlier, I mean, we're at the infancy of the process. I can't speak for the developers. I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm guessing by the time they get a shovel in the ground, build units, lease them, that cost per pupil per child is gonna be much higher than 15,500.
More than likely, I'm using a rough
Right.
estimate.
And you're using the accurate current number. But just for the public, 4 years from now, that's gonna be 20,000 per kid, right?
Right, with, again, no real solid promise that the projected revenue is actually going to go as high as quickly as the expense per student would.
Through you, Madam Chair, it'll never come out. I've read these studies for 25 years in my career, and with all due respect to, Councilor Frangio's comments last week about roads, he's accurate in the fact that costs don't really add up for what you bring in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
It has never been that way. It will not be that way under this project, and will never be that way. I know despite our best efforts, we will try, but it won't. Because the system that we have set up isn't dollar for dollar perfect like that. Maybe in the future, it will work out that way. I don't know if the developers have a different model of calculations, but I just caution against the idea somehow everything just works out perfect. I think, there could be far fewer than 43 kids. Sociology demographics tell us, like we all know in Franklin, there are way fewer kids being born today. In fact, Mass Taxpayers Foundation had a report come out a month ago on demographics in Massachusetts saying that in 2027, I believe, there will be more natural deaths in Massachusetts than natural births. That is unbelievable. That is truly uncanny.
Yeah.
So I don't know, and I think they're estimating. I agree that number might be low, but I've read these studies. There's been so many of them done over time about the cost. It's really hard, Councilor Jones, to pin it down perfectly. I think what is going to be likely exposed, in addition to the school children, 3 bedrooms and maybe the 2 bedrooms, are probably the expense affiliated with the transportation infrastructure. It's probably going to be the costliest element of this.
Thank you, Jamie. I think to my point, thank you, Madam Chair, I got one more question to that.
Okay.
Is my overall feeling, based on just the 2 questions I've asked, is we're looking at a project that's going into an area that could affect our future economic growth in a positive sense, meaning that we have an industrial zone that, for all intents and purposes, if developed according to what it's zoned for, as well as the overlays, could actually benefit us in the long run as far as tax revenue is concerned in respect to expense, compared to a project that, for the most part, would add to our expense for all intents and purposes and take away from future growth, which is bothersome for me. My only other bothersome part of this is the fact that you're looking for a waiver for 5 stories for an apartment building. Through you, Madam Chair, to Jamie, how does the fire department feel about that? With five buildings, 5 stories tall, kind of tucked in up off of Grove Street?
Through you, Madam Chair, the fire chief has written a letter acknowledging that the building will meet code. I think the fire chief has also talked to them about the critical nature of the purchase, the authorization the council gave maybe a month ago for obviously replacing the full ladder truck, which is now on order due to your support. Obviously, the ladder truck is needed for a project like this of that story. So I think, you know, looking out, and I think he mentioned it, and I don't want to say anything incorrect, but at some point, thank you, Councilor Sheridan, at some point he had a slide up, the fire chief, of the buildings in town and the runs they do, and I apologize, I just don't have the number right off the top of my head, but this wouldn't be the only set of buildings, but you know, obviously the quantity of those buildings at that level are you know, not the most common height in Franklin. But the fire chief did write a letter acknowledging that the project does meet the code specifics. And so from that perspective, the fire department, I think, is comfortable with what they've, the draft preliminary design that they've at least have on the table.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Jones. Councilor Sheridan.
Yeah, so the chair, through you to town administrator, this is a little different than the discussion last week, but this developer, correct? We will have a homeowners association that handles all the expenses, unlike some of these other developments, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't actually know. I believe so, but that would be up to these folks over here.
I'm sorry.
So there would be a homeowners association that handles the road?
No, it would
No,
be,
it's not. Okay.
it would be privately owned by Fairfield, and we would,
Yeah, but, so it wouldn't add anything as far as like the road?
They pay the tenants, they pay their rental.
Right, because it's tenants, not condos. so-
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so
exactly.
you'd handle the
Yeah,
the-
so
the
we would
streets.
do all the maintenance and management and,
water too, or, okay.
yeah.
And I really like the idea of connecting and I remember this property, since I lived in Franklin, I've driven by there. I assumed it was a farm, it looked like a farm. It has been for sale since 2008 when I came. It was a big for sale sign for years. What?
It was an apple orchard.
It was? Yeah, but since, I've always wondered about, I thought maybe they're trying to sell it as a farm. So, any plans for, first of all, I love the idea of connecting the state park to the SNET. I've hiked this state forest with my kids, and I think I've come across those do not enter signs. So they will come down and be access to everybody. And if there's 43 kids, any plan for a playground or anything?
Typically, we don't get a huge demand because the kids are usually
Going
like
someplace.
1 or 2, and then people are
Okay.
moving out. But we have done that in the past,
Yeah.
so it's something we can look at.
And I think that's it.
Thank you, Councilor Sheridan. Councilor Frangillo?
Yeah, thank you. So it seems like an opportunity just to sort of give some thought, so that's what I'll do. Here's why I like it. The increased revenue, which I do think, let's be clear, your point's very well taken in terms of, let's make sure that we're maximizing the potential revenue of each parcel. Each student doesn't cost us 15,000 more, right? Most of what we spend on is buildings, superintendent, principals, faculty, staff, right? Each additional student, like it takes 500 to get a new building, or whatever. It takes 30 just to get that first new teacher, right? Most of it's going toward larger things. It's not like we're spending $15,000 to $20,000 on each additional student. It sort of triggers. But your point's very well taken in that we should be maximizing the revenue of each parcel. But either way, increased revenue, good thing. Increased housing options, good thing. Potential improvements, especially to the multi-use pathway, fantastic. That warms my heart. Here's why I don't like it. It's really just the location. for many of the reasons that have been said in terms of it being an industrial parcel. But in my mind, you called it pedestrian oriented. I think that's laughable. Walkability is defined as having routes that are useful, safe, comfortable, and interesting. There are no routes that are useful. You would never want to walk to any of your basic needs: work, school, shops. You just don't from that parcel. It's not interesting. Aren't good sidewalks. They're long. It's 2.5 miles, according to Google, just to walk to the transit station. Why do we care about that? We care about it for a few reasons. One is that increases our traffic. If you have to take a car to every single place, then that's what's going to increase our traffic. The thing, if you see up and down 140, most of these 40B units are walking to the grocery store. They're walking to school. They're using the school buses. They're not adding to our traffic, at least our internal traffic, as much. Every single person living in these places will have to use a car to get to every single place. That hurts our traffic. It also hurts our affordability, right? It's really hard to call these affordable if you have to use a car to get everywhere. AAA has now raised its average cost of car ownership for a year over $10,000, right? Those are expenses that we're adding on top of these otherwise affordable units. And it's what differentiates it from every other 40B that's come before us, is it's at least been some way connected to our, basic needs, or our previous and likely again fixed bus route, which this would not be. I don't have the answers for how we can make this parcel work. But I would think that I would start with connectivity to basic needs, being transit, shops, our downtown groceries, things like that. Particularly if you get us to Forge Park, I think that would be something. But it's a difficult. I really appreciate you coming forward. Again, 40B is great. I listed all the reasons why it's good. It's going to be a difficult location to make positive for the town.
I think, Councilor Frangillo, what I'm hearing you saying is that there needs to be a shuttle.
I'll let them present us with
an electric
ideas.
shuttle.
But if you give me an electric shuttle running
With a green
to
roof.
Forge Park,
Right?
Park to the,
Forge Park shuttle,
to the plaza.
shuttle to the. But
I don't know how.
I don't
much
know.
these things cost
Would you
or
like
if
to
they're
like
feasible.
respond to that or?
No,
No.
that's certainly
No.
something we will take into consideration, and actually a great idea, because you're right, people don't want to get in their car to go everywhere. That's one of the detriments if someone's looking at, say, Dean Avenue versus this property, and
Yeah.
where am I gonna live, who am I gonna pay rent to? That's a factor, right? A lot of people, they want to get on the train, be able to walk there,
Yeah.
walk to shops and retail, and while this site has a lot of benefits, being great access to the highway and a quick drive to retail and to the train station, it doesn't have pedestrian-friendly features except, nature trails and hopefully a connection to the rail trail. So you're right, it's, there's no perfect site, but there's probably a way to address some of those concerns. So we'll think about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's definitely one of those, the Franklin for All project, we've been talking about how do we connect community and how do we make it so that people can get to their, what is it? Not
Basic needs.
basic needs, yeah, basic needs without having to take a car. And I think that Councilor Frangillo's point is very well taken. I think I've been thinking about this for a while, and that it's just where it is so far away from downtown that we're trying to revitalize and invigorate. And so it's a little different for us to think about something a little bit farther away, right, than being downtown like that. And in the Station 117, I go by it twice a day, and I see people walking around. Everybody has dogs. People are out. It's really fun to go by, and I see the same people, and there's kids. There's like baby carriages, and it's really nice. I mean, I do enjoy. I enjoy seeing it, going by it, seeing the people there. Everybody seems happy. There's one side, one area which is really kind of close to the road, and that kind of concerns me about one of the buildings that's really close to the road there, and it's really high. I think it's tall and a little too close to the road, but that's one of my concerns. I know that the planning board gave you a couple of, like, the other buildings were too tall to be next to the forest, maybe. So you're addressing what the planning board is giving you?
There is some competing comments about different
Yeah.
buildings, but I think one theme we've heard is the building that's close to the road is too close. So there's
Yeah.
some options. We can move it back, flip the parking in the building. We can make that, one of the other, we had a standalone clubhouse, the amenity building, which has become mostly a package storage room for all the Amazon deliveries that everybody gets. So we keep building bigger and bigger rooms, but we might incorporate that amenity building into one of the larger buildings to just have fewer buildings, less impervious area. Maybe that goes up front, so it's lower density along the road, and then it gets steeper as we go back. So that's kind of what we're thinking as a way to address not only some of the concerns we've heard from the wetlands and the planning board, and from
Yeah.
tonight.
And there was something from the Conservation Commission about maybe, like, if you have to fill in something, then you have an area, you mentioned something about maybe having an area where you could reintroduce wetlands or
Yeah,
replicate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And usually it's a slightly higher, it's
like
like
2 to 1 or
1
something.
2 to 1.
Yeah.
And so we have enough room to do that on this site. We're just kind of defining where those wetlands are. It's interesting, so it feels like Franklin's a little more forward thinking than a lot of places, because years ago, all the 40Bs were on the edge of the town, right on the border with another town.
Right.
Because that's where, that was the desire, was let's keep them out of the way. We don't want to see them. We don't want to deal with this. But now I think people are realizing it's good to incorporate it into the fabric of the town, and so you can drive by, like you said, and it's connectivity. So it's interesting, the sort of nature of development has changed. And
Are you saying we're progressive? It's like, wow. No, it was a joke. I'm gonna go out to the audience, and we have.
Hi, Joe Halligan. Just a little rebuttal to Mr. Jones's comments. Well, I do appreciate the fact of wanting to have more industrial. I've always pushed that we should have more industrial, more commercial, because we're like a 12 or 13% commercial versus 80. It's about an 80-20 ratio.
80-20.
It's different. We all know, we all remember the name, Andrew Pasanti, good friend of ours, ex-council. He actually had that as a listing, that property, a few years back. And I was very interested in possibly buying that to do something commercial industrial. After reviewing the amount of wetlands on it, which could never hold or withstand anything industrial or commercial. It's very weaved and roundabout, so therefore, someone like Fairfield can work around those edges and kind of make it work, but as far as having a large medical office building, an Amazon, anything like that, with a 100,000 square foot building, 200, the land is not feasible for that. It's almost as if it was designed for residential, so it has that beauty of the turns and going around the wetlands, overlooking your windows, looking at the ponds, the streams. I really appreciate it, because I'm a commercial industrial guy. So having knowledge of that property, I know that that will never happen and it won't work. I studied it. They almost wanted to give me the property, the cost of it. The improvements was just out to make anything work commercial industrial. As far as children in the schools, Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're losing 150 students a year out of the school system in Franklin. I don't think that's gonna affect the amount of children that are in school. And the last thing I'd like to touch on is 43, 46 new students. Well, we're not saying they're coming from out of town. They may already be in the system and moving out of another location to go into an affordable home. They already may be in the Franklin school system. So we're not necessarily gonna attract new students. I would hope that a lot of them are gonna be from Franklin, because that's kind of what this project is designed for. But again, the real major issue is the industrial base, and I really appreciate that. If that was all flat, dry land, it wouldn't be there.
You would already have.
You would have already
something. Thank you, Joe. I think Joe would already have something built on it if it could be built there. Is that what you were saying? Yeah, okay. Counselor Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question in regards to one of the waivers you have listed here, and maybe through you, Madam Chair, to the town administrator to explain this one. Under the last waiver, it says a waiver to request stormwater management. The project will be permitted under the Mass DEP stormwater regulations. The stormwater will be designed to comply with local stormwater bylaw to extent. I'm just confused. How does waiving our local stormwater management have anything to do with anything? Can you explain, Jim?
It's a great question. I think with the rise of the compliance that the town's able to do, I mean, that's something, I'd have to ask Gus, you know, is that a waiver that's asked often? Is that a typical waiver, Gus? Waiver request? Because as Councilor Jones is, I think, referring to, you know, the town does have a very progressive stormwater bylaw. I'll say yes, because it is very, you know, I mean, it is very progressive and well ahead of its time. It was put in, I think, 07, 08, probably 15 years ago now, Mark, Brian, when you got here, but I'm not sure if it's a typical waiver that's requested.
I can
Okay.
answer that real quick.
You got three people, Glenn. Mark, Rob, and
I'm gonna
Gus.
refer,
We'll
I wanna hear
go
what Gus
Gus
has to
first.
say.
Okay.
I'm gonna refer that to Mark.
I would suggest you ask the applicant to define what
Okay.
that means, and then
Yeah.
go from there.
All right, thank
All
you,
right,
Mark.
I'll do that first.
You get to define.
What's the waiver mean?
It was somewhat of a blanket statement without having studied the site very deeply. We got that, sort of a pushback on that waiver request from the planning board in their comments.
Yep.
And we studied it further, and we can fully comply with the town's.
Okay,
So
that's pretty
that'll
much,
be off the table.
you're gonna avoid that waiver?
Yeah.
Okay, fine, that answers my question then. Thank you. But I did want to hear, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, yeah.
if you take this question to Gus in regards to,
Is it often?
is it a common waiver that someone would ask for?
Which one?
The
Stormwater.
stormwater waiver that they requested, is that a common thing that people would request, that they waiver our
I know,
current stormwater management bylaws?
there has to be mitigation with stormwater, some way, somehow, is my interpretation of it. It's not a common thing that I know of. I'm gonna actually push this question off to Mark Sorrell, too.
Okay.
I think generally, in a comprehensive permit situation, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of bundled together.
Okay.
So, Jamie alluded to the fact that we've got a progressive, we also have an expansive stormwater management bylaw, which was required by our stormwater discharge permit. So any disturbance of 2 acres or more, and this is all, the entire site, this is not restricted to wetlands, conservation retains their jurisdiction, but the rest of the site has to be developed. There's pre-development requirements, there's development requirements during construction, and there's post-development requirements. So it has to do with the entire site development, which is why I asked him to clarify what it was he was concerned about. Because it's a very broadly worded and broadly covering bylaw.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and if I could further expound, so we didn't have any waivers for Dean Avenue, and that, we did that successfully. That's why I'm comfortable saying that here. In some towns, there's some very specific things in their local stormwater guidance that conflict with sometimes with the state guidance, so that sort of it's usually a sort of a knee jerk is to just ask for that waiver because sometimes there's conflicts. You know, open basins versus covered storage and whatnot. But not an issue here.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
all right, so it doesn't exist anymore.
Thank you.
Well,
Just take it off the list.
does anyone in the audience have any more comments or questions? Anyone on Zoom land? See, I'll say Zoom land now. Online? Give everybody a second. Counselors, any other questions? No. So with that, I want to thank you very much for being here tonight, and everybody, Brian, your 40B discussion. I know it was a little bit longer than we thought we were going to go tonight, but I think it's very important information, and everyone got to ask questions. And with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you for having us.